She pulled into her driveway after a long day, expecting nothing more than silence and sleep. Instead, she found a man blocking her path, one hand on his holster, the other gripping the authority he thought he had. In seconds, a peaceful night twisted into a nightmare, all because he decided she didn't look like someone who belonged there. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her rank. And he had no idea that the woman he was threatening was one of the most highly trained tactical commanders in the country. But the moment he reached for his gun, everything changed. If she had known what was waiting in her own driveway, she might have braced herself. But the worst was still ahead. Simone Kearns lived her life in sharp contrast. Intense days leading tactical teams through high-risk operations, followed by quiet nights in the calm suburb she'd chosen for her daughter's sake. Fairgrove Estates was supposed to be her reset button, a gated community, tree-lined streets, neighbors who waved politely and pretended they remembered each other's names. After years in the field, Simone wanted normal again, a space where she could walk to her front door without scanning every corner. That evening was no different. She left the Sacramento field office exhausted but satisfied, replaying the day's briefings in her head while planning tomorrow's agenda. Her schedule never left room for chaos. Morning run, school drop-off, noon strategy session. Everything in neat, controlled order. Even the drive home felt routine. The gate clicking open, the steady hum of her SUV, the soft glow of porch lights guiding the way. This neighborhood was her sanctuary, the place she bought with pride after years of hard work. She had only lived there a few months, long enough to memorize the cracks in the sidewalk, but not long enough for the community to know her story. To them, she was just a quiet woman in Unit 314 who kept to herself. Yet beneath that calm surface, cracks were already forming. Subtle glances from neighbors who hesitated before waving, whispers that stopped when she walked by, questions about who she was and how she afforded to live there. She brushed it off. She'd faced bigger threats than suspicion. But as she turned into her driveway that night, she realized suspicion wasn't the real danger. It was the man waiting for her, the one who had already decided she didn't belong. What she didn't know was that his next move would turn her peaceful street into a battleground of pride, prejudice, and deadly assumptions, and the night was just beginning. Simone eased her SUV closer to her driveway, expecting nothing more than the quiet hum of an ordinary evening. But the man standing there turned every expectation upside down. Douglas Brinton, the self-appointed safety chair of Fairgrove Estates, planted himself squarely in her path, arms crossed, eyes narrowing as if he had the right to judge who belonged in her own neighborhood. The moment she rolled down her window, the glint of the gun at his hip caught her off guard, not for the threat itself, but for the audacity that someone could so casually brand her a danger simply for existing. Every word he spat carried suspicion, prejudice, and entitlement, painting her as an outsider in a place she had legally and rightfully called home. Her training kicked in, heartbeat steady, eyes scanning his unsteady stance, measuring each twitch and every shallow breath, knowing that a single misstep could escalate into tragedy. Curtains twitched, porch lights flicked on, neighbors peered from behind blinds, and Simone realized the spectacle of her own life had begun before a single shot was fired. Douglas stepped closer, the gun now fully drawn, aiming as if the authority of his ego could bend the law itself, and she had mere seconds to ground the situation before it tipped into irreversible danger. With calm precision, Simone spoke, measured and commanding, trying to pierce the wall of pride and paranoia, but he only doubled down, convinced his role as the neighborhood's judge and executioner, blind to her true identity, blind to the law, blind to the fact that every second he held that gun, he was spiraling further into recklessness. Phones flickered across the street, red lights blinking as neighbors recorded the standoff, amplifying the weight of every decision, every breath, every hesitation. Simone's composure contrasted sharply with his unraveling bravado, the air thick with tension, fear, and simmering anger that had nothing to do with her actions and everything to do with the color of her skin, the audacity of her presence, the threat she posed as imagined order. Each pause stretched like hours, the silence punctuated by the metallic shift of his weapon, the shallow exhale of a man grappling with authority he didn't truly have, and the quiet whispers of neighbors realizing the grotesque imbalance of power before them. For a fleeting moment, It seemed the gun might lower, but pride, ego, and racial bias held it aloft, threatening to erupt in irreversible violence. Simone's mind raced, calculating, predicting, trying to bend the perception with truth, patience, and command, yet the situation teetered dangerously between confrontation and catastrophe. And just when it seemed she had bought herself a fraction of control, Douglas's finger twitched again, the barrel swaying toward her, and the night held its breath, because no one could yet predict how close the edge had become, and whether reason could survive against a weapon fueled by prejudice and unchecked authority. The standoff had escalated far beyond misunderstanding. It was now a battle of power, identity, and survival, and Simone knew the next moments would determine everything. Douglas Britton's finger trembled on the trigger, the gun quivering like a pendulum of impending disaster, and Simone felt the weight of every second pressing down on her. Neighbors held their breaths, some frozen behind curtains, others gripping phones with red recording lights blinking, capturing every moment of the injustice unfolding in real time. He spat accusations, his voice a mix of fear, pride, and blind prejudice, declaring that she didn't belong, that he was the one keeping the streets safe, while Simone, calm but burning with controlled fury, measured each word, each step, each breath, trying to defuse a man who had no concept of law, authority, or human decency. The barrel of his gun swayed too close, and for a terrifying heartbeat, the entire street seemed suspended in a fragile, volatile silence. One twitch could ignite catastrophe. Simone's mind raced. One false move and it could end in tragedy, yet she couldn't cower. To yield would validate the arrogance and racial bias that had brought her here, to be judged not by her skills, her achievements, or her humanity, but by the color of her skin. Every plea she made, every command she issued, was soaked in the authority of a lifetime of facing danger and injustice, yet he resisted, blinded by ego and bigotry, dragging the tension to unbearable heights. And then, the sirens pierced the night like shards of truth, red and blue lights flooding the street, reflecting off Douglas's tense face, illuminating the absurdity of his power in stark relief against real law enforcement. His eyes flicked, panic flaring as a reality hit. He was not the protector. He was a threat, his pride crumbling, hands shaking, the gun now a symbol of the very danger he had sworn to eradicate. Neighbors gasped, whispers turning into murmurs of shock and disbelief, as the world seemed to pivot on that thin line between control and chaos. For the first time, Douglas wavered, the weight of his actions pressing against the last vestiges of his ego, yet the gun remained in his hand, a precarious relic of misplaced authority and racial prejudice. In that moment, Simone realized the battle wasn't just about her safety. It was about exposing a lie, about confronting a fear rooted in bias, about holding up a mirror to a man who had mistaken dominance for righteousness. The crowd waited, silent, tense, the night suspended in anticipation, and as Douglas's resolve faltered, it became clear that the next move would decide not only the night's outcome, but the stark lesson the entire neighborhood would carry forward. Finally, Douglas's hand shook one last time before the gun clattered to the driveway, a hollow, final sound that marked the end of the standoff built on fear, prejudice, and the illusion of authority. Officers moved in swiftly, cuffing him while neighbors slowly emerged from behind curtains, whispers turning into stunned murmurs as the reality sank in. The woman they had doubted, the outsider in her eyes, had faced a man who threatened her life simply because of who she was, and emerged unscathed, calm, composed, and resolute. Simone tucked her badge away, heart still racing, but the victory was bitter. She had won the confrontation, yet the underlying truth remained. This was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a system where assumptions and bias can place innocent lives at risk, where power can be claimed without accountability, and where the color of one's skin can turn presence into perceived threat. The aftermath stretched beyond the driveway. Conversations ignited across the community. Police reports documented. Cameras captured every second. Yet the deeper lesson lingered, invisible but undeniable. Simone knew that the courage it took to stand firm in her own home would echo far beyond that street. But she also knew the world was full of neighbors, colleagues, strangers, all too ready to weaponize assumptions. And as she finally stepped inside, closing the door behind her, one question pressed relentlessly. How many more people have to prove their right to exist safely, simply because society decided who belongs and who doesn't? This was more than a story of one night, one street, or one confrontation. It was a mirror reflecting the persistent, dangerous reality of racial injustice, and a challenge to every witness, every neighbor, and every community. Will we finally confront the prejudice hiding in plain sight?